Hello, fellow mech warriors, Mage Leader here, and it's the weekend, once again. So you know what that means. It means I'm once again fighting off a cold somehow. I got a raging fever and my throat feels like it's about to implode, but I decided to try my best and get a video out anyway, because something happened this week that I'm sure excited a lot of you. We got a new Battletech sourcebook out. We got Tamar Rising. Now, I'm still waiting on my physical copy to arrive in the mail, but in the meantime, I did get it in PDF, and I read through the book. And I thought, I'll just give my quick thoughts on it. So starting off, just jumping straight into it without any further preamble, it is a bad time to be a Steiner fan right now. If you're hoping that Tamar Rising is referring to that area rising up from Jade Falcon and returning to the fold, I've got bad news for you. That is not what happens at all. Steiner's sitting in a position where they're poised to regain a lot of lost ground, and I'm pretty sure by the end of this book they actually have less than what they started with, because they've got like the same number of planets under their control, but now they've lost a huge chunk of the LCAF because some rogue general has decided to make her own little fiefdom out there in the Tamar system and get a bunch of other planets under her command. So that's going down. So the book is really centered around the Falcon operational zone, or occupational zone, and that's really all that's here. There isn't a ton of content to this book. What's here is interesting. It's a bit of a mixed bag, in my opinion. How does it compare to Ilclan? Well, it's better than Ilclan, but, that's not really saying much. I would say it's an improvement overall. There are some things here that give me some concern, but I think those have kind of been mostly set off to the wayside since we heard about what the titles of the next two source books are going to be, so I'll get into that. So the first thing that we look at is the Tamar Pact itself. So the Tamar Pact is being run by a Lyran general who is from Tamar originally, who, after being sent to check and make sure that the Falcons are actually gone, went in and said, oh, actually, we don't like Steiner because they didn't protect us, so we're just going to become our own thing, because you're going to be able to protect yourselves a whole lot better than with the entirety of the Lyran Commonwealth. Okay, whatever. I find it to be a bit of a stretch, but it's probably covered in more detail in one of the novels. That's usually what happens in the comments section when I criticize something like this in a source book. Like, oh, well, if you read this novel over here that came out, that explains it. Okay. I feel like a story should really make sense in the source book and not require the extra reading. I mean, the extra reading is nice, and I like the novels as much as the next guy, but I'd like the story just to make sense right out of the gate. But it's believable enough, I guess. It makes enough sense that I'm not super concerned about it. The Tamar Pact rises up and becomes its own entity out there in that section of the former Falcon OZ. And I think it's interesting that they're covering just the Falcon OZ here, because the Wolves left their territory virtually undefended, like just as much as the Falcons did, because they took everything they had to Terra. They fought the Republic of the Sphere and wiped them out, which caused heavy losses, according to the Ilclan sourcebook. And then, on top of that, they fought a no-holds-barred, ridiculously destructive campaign against Clan Jade Falcon. They're decimated at this point. Like, Jade Falcon is practically non-existent, but Wolf isn't doing a whole lot better. Or at least they shouldn't be. There's no mention in this book whatsoever if Steiner makes any incursions into their space. Maybe they're saving that for the next book. I'm not sure. But it seems to me, based on what I've read here, that the Wolves are not going to lose any territory. That's what it looks like to me. Now, I could be wrong. they could just as easily turn around and lose a ton of their stuff. But based on their incursions into Falcon space, all I can say is things are just not going well for the Steiners. Trillian Steiner is, in my opinion, a very poor Archon. She's incredibly indecisive. I get that she's in a difficult spot where it's tough to make the right decision as to what to do because they're so weakened right now. But she's just incapable of enforcing the will of her faction in any meaningful way. And she just kind of sits on her hands all the time and says, well, there's nothing I can do about it. We're just going to have to wait and see for the time being. And I get that that's kind of, that's the approach that makes the most sense for Steiner at this point, just given how fucked they've been for the past several years of fiction. But like it gets to the point where you're like, okay, you have to do something or you're just going to fall apart, But if you're a Jade Falcon fan, you don't have to despair. Yes, the Jade Falcons do lose more territory here, but compared to what happened to them in Ilkland, this is actually pretty tame. So they are not completely gone. The majority of them have been absorbed by Clan Wolf, but there is a remnant in the OZ that is kicking a surprising amount of ass. Like there's a really cool sequence where Clan Hell's Horses makes an incursion and tries to take some of their territory, and they just absolutely mop the floor with them. I mean, it's not one-sided. It's a very intense battle that they have, but at the end of it, it's very clear that the Falcons are the ones who have outplayed the Hell's Horses in a lot of ways. They're not out of the fight yet. They came out swinging in this book, and they held their own. So I think that if you're a Jade Falcon fan, there's a lot here to be proud of. And really, I think it's an improvement because, now Malvina Hazen is gone. You don't have to try and justify her terrible war crimes anymore. Nobody's shooting at firefighters. So I think that this is a much better place for the Jade Falcons to be as a faction in terms of their cool factor, their likability. That being said, it's not ideal in terms of their power and their territory. They're definitely in a tight spot at the moment, but it's not as tight as I thought it was going to be. I thought they were just kind of done. But there's very clearly a strong remnant of them out there, and they're bumping up against the Tamar Pact, and I gotta double check what this other faction is called. So it's being run by Duke Vedet Brewer. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. Brewer is the guy, if you don't remember, who was the Archon before Trillian Steiner. He got ousted, and he set up his own little holding on Milicia. So he and the Tamar Pact, and there's like one other faction here somewhere. Oh yes, I'll come back to them. But yeah, the other factions are running into Jade Falcon, and it's not easy for them. Like, it's genuinely a struggle to go up against Jade Falcon at this point. They're not pushovers. So I think that a lot of people who really like them are going to have a good time with this book. Also, if you're a fan of the Kellhounds are back, baby. They've retaken Ark Royal, as well as a few other planets just for good measure, and they've set up their own little kingdom right there next to everybody else. So, really, that whole sector of space has kind of balkanized. They've turned into these small nation states, just kind of on the fringe border of the Lyran Commonwealth. And that's really what the majority of this book covers, is the formation of these little factions and their first few conflicts, some of them with each other, some of them with other sections. And it's, like I said, it's a bad time to be a Steiner fan, but there's lots of interesting potential here. So we got smaller factions popping up, and we have no idea how long they're going to last, if at all. I know Battletech doesn't tend to really favor the small factions very much. They tend to pop up and then get wiped out pretty quickly. So I wouldn't get too attached to anybody here. But there's some interesting potential. Some cool storytelling stuff that can happen. But if you're looking for Steiner to make a big comeback in this book, yeah, this ain't it, Chief. This is very much them losing even more shit than they did before. So, well, they technically come out, I think, with like 4 more planets than they used to have. Um, thanks, neighbors. Just throw shit down on the floor up top, why don't you? I gotta get my own house. Where was I? So, I think they technically capture 4 more planets. So they have a tiny bit more territory than they did, but it's not enough to recuperate anything from what they've lost. So they're in a weaker position overall than they were at the start of this book, which is really frustrating to me because I want to see them come back a little bit. Like they don't need to completely stabilize, but I would have liked to have seen things improve. Like give us a glimmer of hope. Because at the moment, the Lyran Commonwealth is on the verge of collapse. Like it's really, really bad. Like I've had some theories where the utter lack of any mention of the Wolf OZ in this book, despite the fact that it should be completely undefended, that, it's. I was really hoping that Steiner would push into their space and start taking the fight to them a little bit because the Wolves have been the special favorites of the writers for a while now, or at least it feels that way to a large extent. But the Wolves are definitely in a good position right now, it seems, even though they really shouldn't be, because, like I said, like their worlds are undefended. There's the other, factions should be chomping at the bit to take over the territory that they've left behind. With their religious dedication to taking Terra, they have sacrificed a lot. But it seems, at least at the moment, that they're just going to be fine. So, like the next book, there's some speculation that it's going to cover the Wolf OZ more. I haven't seen anything to outright confirm that. The title of the book is Empire Alone, but whether that's going to refer to their OZ or if that's going to refer to like the Wolf Empire as a whole, are they just going to be incredibly strong and they're going to be fighting off everybody and having incredible victories left, right, and center? Honestly, I kind of think so. I feel like that's where this is headed because there's no mention under the Lyran, like even in the summary where it talks about basically everything the Lyran Commonwealth has done for the past couple of years. There's no mention whatsoever of anything to do with Clan Wolf's territory, which there really should be. Like they've been feeling it out, and this kind of brings me back to another issue that I have with current BattleTech, and it's the HPG network. For God's sake, please, Catalyst, just fix the goddamn HPGs. The setting does not work without it. They're incredibly inconsistent with whether or not these things are actually working. So, if somebody needs to coordinate a huge army across multiple star systems and pull in tons of resources from around an empire and get a force together, no problem. Somebody wants to hire a bunch of mercenaries, no problem. Even though MERCnet isn't working and the Mercenary Review Board no longer exists, at least not as it was ever utilized before. It shouldn't exist. It's a little hard to do without HPG communication, without faster than light communication. But apparently people can just hire tons of mercenaries, and it's just as simple as that. But with all that being said, for some reason, like how Steiner doesn't know what happened to Terra because of the HPG blackout. And it's like, is there a blackout or is there not? Make up your mind. You can't have it both ways. It's really frustrating to read because you'll read one part about how, the HPGs are working and it'll build up your expectations of, okay, so this is how it works. So I can expect this to happen or this not to happen. And then the opposite happens and they're like, well, the HPGs, and you're like, it breaks its own rules in order to justify its story, which is really, really bad. I get that this story is screwed up and that they're just trying their best to make things function again, and that they say they have a plan for the HPGs. Something's going to happen there. But honestly, just rip the band-aid off and hand wave it and say that they're fixed. Like, I will not complain a bit if you retcon this, because watching you guys pussyfoot around this and try and make things work until you can come up with a logical reason for it to be fixed, it's painful. Like, it's getting to the point where I don't feel like I can see where the story is going. Like, I have a feeling about where I think it's going, and that's because of, I kind of know how writers think a lot of the time. But, that's all intuition, so that's perfectly, that could be completely wrong, and, there's no way of knowing until it comes out. But when you don't have consistent rules, you don't have a consistent world, you don't have a world that makes sense, you don't have a world that you can actually tell a good story in. Like, things just pop up out of nowhere. And, if your setting is that from word go, like 40K is, then you can get away with it. But Battletech has always tried to justify this, and justify itself, and it's getting really strained because the Dark Age was such a mess in terms of its logic and bending over backwards to make things happen, that it's just not something that you can justify even with several source books. And I'm glad to hear that they have some sort of game plan. But honestly, I do think it would have been much better and much easier for them to just rip the Band-Aid off and say, okay, Dark Age, that didn't happen. The HBG blackout, that didn't happen. We're starting over. You can decanonize a section of your fiction without, ruining everything. And I guarantee you that the number of Dark Age fans is far outnumbered by the people who absolutely despise the Dark Age. I can all but promise you that. And there's been a lot of that kind of storytelling in Il-Clan so far. Like, there's a lot of times where it feels like a faction just wins because the writers say, well, they're predestined to win, so we're going to make that happen, rather than try and lay out the events and say, okay, so what would actually happen if this went down? Who would win? It feels like they pick a faction out from the beginning and say, okay, these guys are going to win, now we have to try and justify it. And I mean, that can work, but it feels strained, it feels stressed, it feels like it's pushed to its logical limit. And it's a bad way to write, really, and I don't know, like, I've never noticed this about Battletech before. I don't know if this is the way it's always been, because it never felt like this to me. I mean, maybe if I go back and reread a bunch of the old stuff, it'll come across that way, but outside of some examples here and there, like specific points, for the most part, it's felt like it's just kind of been looking at how a faction would go about things and then what the logical result of it would be, up until we hit, like, the Jihad, and then it just turns into, well, we want something to happen in the lore, so we're going to bend over backwards to make it work. And again, you can kind of do that. Like, there's room for that kind of writing, but you have to be very careful about it. Otherwise, it's going to come across as forced, and people are going to see, certain plot devices as illegitimate. It's going to feel a lot less authentic when you do it that way. And people like the authenticity of Battletech. It's one of the things I like the most about it, is how it feels like a logical universe most of the time. But everything, like Jihad and beyond, has just been jumping the shark over and over and over again. And it's getting old, at this point. I want to see a return to things that actually make sense. Like, let's get on board with this, and let's bring some logic back into this universe, because it desperately needs it. So I've been rambling for about 20 minutes or so about this. I'm voicing I sound like a broken record. I'm voicing the same complaints I had about Il-Clan. This book is definitely an improvement. It feels better. Like, it doesn't feel as contrived as the other books are. It still feels to me like, I know this one is focused specifically on the Falcon OZ, but the fact that there is no mention whatsoever in the synopsis, like, this is supposed to cover a couple years of time, there's no mention whatsoever of anything going on in the Wolf OZ, which there should be. There really, really should be. And that, to me, that says that they aren't planning on having Wolf lose anything. And I know a lot of other people are looking at the titles in the next books, the things that we've been revealed to us in previews and such, and they're telling me my concerns are unfounded and that we're going to watch them fall apart. And there has been some foreshadowing. So there's the fairly ominous warning that Devlin Stone gave to Alaric Ward about Terra being a prison, essentially. But you could take that one of two ways. That could either be him saying, that could be foreshadowing where it's like, yeah, now things are going to be really tough for the Wolves and it's going to be bad. And it's going to be tricky and they have a lot of challenges and they're probably going to have a bad time. You could also take it as saying that this is a new challenge that Clan Wolf is going to overcome, and despite of the impossible odds, which, given how their invasion of Terra went, I'm inclined to say that's the more likely outcome there. Now, this is all personal intuition, and I hope to God that I'm wrong. But, I mean, I'm pretty pessimistic about most of my favorite franchises at this point, just because I've seen so many of them fall apart around the seams. Battletech needs a lot of work in order to get to a point where it starts to make any semblance of sense again. And these feel like baby steps. And I get that we've only had 2 source books in this era, but it feels like rather than addressing the issues, they're just kind of treading water, like slight improvements, if any, but it's almost entirely just pussyfooting, for lack of a better term. I mean, that makes it sound worse than it is, but I don't see a whole lot of dedication to making things better, to fixing what's they've admitted is broken with this setting. And it feels a lot like more of the same. And there's this dedication to push forward no matter what, and to try and just make things work as you go. I think that the setting is too broken for that. Honestly, I feel like there's just it needs too much work for you to take the slow approach. But again, we're only a few books in, so things could get significantly better in very quickly, and I could be completely unfounded. But my predictions for the future, I'm going to warn you up front, are not particularly optimistic, and I don't have much to base this on other than my own intuition, such as it is. So, my prediction for what's going to happen is that Steiner is going to collapse. I think it's in such a bad position at this point, they're going to have to pull something massive out of their ass in order to regain ground. And really, at this point, they face a crossroads. Either the Tamar Pact has to be crushed, or there's going to be new ones springing up all across their territory. Because the whole reason that the Tamar Pact breaks away and becomes its own thing is because they feel that Steiner is no longer capable of protecting them from outside threats. And really, that's a sentiment that can be echoed across the entirety of the Lyran Commonwealth. So I could see that if they wind up with legitimacy and Trillian Steiner continues to do nothing about them, that others will pop up and it will get significantly worse. And I could see Steiner just crumbling into these tiny little factions that are ripe for the picking, and then the Wolf Empire comes in and sweeps across everything and just wipes them out and reclaims tons of new territory. Now everybody is Clan Wolf, except for, the Draconis Combine and the Capellan Confederation, and for the moment, Davian, the Federated Sons, that is. But again, we don't have the next source book, and what does the title Empire Alone mean? What's it referring to? Is it going to be a situation where Clan Wolf is going to get fucked through every conceivable orifice, or is it going to be them standing alone against impossible odds and winning anyway because they're Clan Wolf and they're just so awesome? We have no idea. And I'll have a much better idea of where the story is headed once that book comes out. Really, everything hinges on Clan Wolf and how taking Terra affects them. So, my predictions for Steiner are not particularly bright. But It's also possible that Trillian is able to rally what remains of the LCAF and just goes and curb stomps the Tamar Pact and establishes that Steiner is still capable of retaking and holding territory. And I think that has potential because that could be a rallying cry for the loyal Lyrans all across the Commonwealth. If it's shown that they still have fangs, that they're able to still go out and do things, then I'll have a little more faith. That could cause much better events to transpire. But I don't really see that happening, and that's mostly because there's a lot of language in this book where I don't think there's a single time in this book where the term Lyran Commonwealth or Steiner is mentioned without the word incompetent being somewhere nearby. Like, they're really harsh when they talk about Steiner here. And they talk about their social generals, and they talk about just the massive incompetence of their military. There's no talk about their ability to fund their troops. Like, their biggest strength has kind of disappeared. And I think that there's potential where they could start changing how their military is organized. I think that Steiner would lose a lot of its flavor if it did that. But I don't know what else you do at this point. Like, their military is on the ropes, and if it continues in the way it always has, it's just gonna lose. So I don't see the Lyran Commonwealth bouncing back at this point. Now, this is all conjecture, again, but based on what I've read here, it really, really looks to me like it feels like they're trying to make you not like Steiner anymore so that you don't feel as bad when they disappear. That's what it looks like to me. And I'm not a huge Lyran Commonwealth fan. I do like them, though, and I think that they're a good part of the setting, and I would be sad to see them go. And I definitely don't want to see Clan Wolf steamroll them any harder than they already have. I don't want them to take all that territory. I don't want Clan Wolf to win anything at this point. I'm so tired of them. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I'm just so goddamn sick of Clan Wolf and their Mary Sue nonsense when they just show up and despite everything logistically and logically and physically being against them, they just come out on top every single time. It doesn't make any sense. It's not believable. It doesn't make the Wolves any cooler. It just makes them annoying. Like, a faction that wins all the time is a boring ass faction, and Clan Wolf is so vanilla, so boring that I just cannot bring myself to care whether or not they win in a situation. And it's gotten to the point where I actively want to see them fail. Like, I want them to lose because they're just so irritating at this point. And, if you're a Clan Wolf fan, congratulations, because this era is, so far, looks like it belongs to you. But it's possible it could all change. I feel like people are giving the writers a lot of credit without a ton to go off of. And, people point to, how well Hour of the Wolf is written and stuff, but, the team that writes the novels is a different team from the ones that write the source books. And if I'm understanding this correctly, the source books are written first, and then it's up to the novelists to kind of step in and justify things, which I don't think is a good way to run the show. I feel like it should be, the story should make sense before the novels come out. Like, the novel shouldn't be the Band-Aid solution to what's going on here. I know they probably don't see it that way, but that's how it looks to me, personally. And that's just my opinion, really, but it's getting to the point where something needs to change. And there's not a lot that happens in this book, to be honest. I probably have my expectations way too high because I wanted this book to be so much more than it is. It's fine on its own merit. It's simple. There's not a ton that transpires in it in terms of, the setting. I just hope we don't have to wait as long as we did for the next one, because something has got to happen, man. There's so little here. The Clan Wolf has taken Terra. We got to know what happens after that. And, mopping up in the Falcon OZ is all well and good, but like, what's going on with Clan Wolf? That's what we're all concerned about at this point. And I'm glad that they wrapped up the stuff with Falcon to show that they aren't completely dead, and that they're, if anything, they're improving now that Malvina's dead. But it's just tiny factions. It's kind of like for those of you who watched Steven Universe, it's like when they have a giant plot reveal in an episode, and then like the next one after a month or more of hiatus, they come back and it's a filler episode, and it's like I don't care about the filler episodes. What's happening next in the story? Yeah, that's kind of what this feels like. And I know I've complained a lot. The book isn't bad. It's definitely an improvement over the last one, but it's a bit rough. Like, there's some things in here that give me concern, but those could all be completely done away with by the time the next one comes out. And really, I've rambled for an entire half an hour, basically to say that I have no idea what's going to happen next, but I don't have high hopes. So, at the risk of repeating myself, even more than I already have, rather than do that, I'm just going to wrap it up here. But suffice to say, you should go and get the book because it's an interesting read, if nothing else. The artwork that's in it is spectacular. It's a good BattleTech book. I'm not personally a fan of where the plot is headed, but I also don't know where all the plot is headed. Though there is a chance, based on one of the future source books, that Rosselhug might finally be splitting away from the Ghost Bears, and that gives me so much hope, but also I'm trying not to get my hopes up too high because I've been disappointed before. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, the book is out, and not much has changed about the setting. If you're looking for big plot points, this really isn't it. But if you want some cool new factions to try out and get a feel for, this has got them, and we'll see how they stick around. So there's a lot to potentially be excited about, and a lot to potentially be worried about. But that's all something that we are going to be able to discuss more in the future. And until then, and until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off.